David, let's talk about the illegal migrants bill. This is a bill that we hear about. I mean, I barely broadcast a day without referring to this bill in one shape or form or discussing it in some way or another. It's certainly incredibly prominent. We hear about it a lot. I spoke to Lord Moria, who was almost in tears, talking about how the House of Lords had to temper it and imbue it with kindness and imbue it with compassion and make special exemptions for pregnant women and for children and all sorts of things. Many different amendments. What's the likelihood of passing that bill now?
Well, it's a real mess. Again, I think the government are digging in on this one, and I hear what you say about what the peer had to say about that. But this is now becoming a question of democracy. The elected House has expressed its will over and again, and the unelected House is dead set on blocking something that really is an important part of the government plan. It goes back to a 2019 manifesto. We've, in the end, I'm afraid, got to take back control of our borders, to coin a phrase from a certain vote a few years back. And the country is really creaking under the burden of all of this, and it has to be dealt with. And I'm afraid most of the amendments in the Lords is set on wrecking the bill. It's not imbuing it with kindness at all. They want to destroy this bill. The government is going to dig in. There's going to be what we call ping pong. So the government's going to send it back, the Lords will send it back, and eventually somebody's going to give way. I suspect in the end it will be the Lords.
Comedian Dom Jolly was protesting today, and this is what he had to say.
I'd say whatever your views on immigration, children are innocent. Children have not chosen to be in this situation. Children have not got views on this. Children need to be treated as children. They need to be looked after. They need not to be detained, and they need to be kept in a safe environment which allows them to just have a childhood.
Let me throw that to you, Professor Tony Travers. Dom Jolly saying children are children, and this isn't right. This isn't fair.
That's what members of the House of Lords have been effectively arguing with the elected majority in the House of Commons about exemptions, different groups amongst boat people and others arriving in the UK who should be treated differently. I think linking it to the by-election, the difficulty that the government has with this issue is that regardless of how it happens, the House of Lords, courts, whatever it is, the government has this very powerful policy to stop the boats, and as of Thursday, the policy won't have been effective. So the government, the longer it pursues the policy, the more it looks weak, given that it set the terms of the agenda here. So I don't think this policy, as the government wants to see it pushed through, is going to be enacted this time of, well, the end of the year, almost certainly.
Do you believe it is foremost in the electorate's minds as something it wants this government to do? Do you think the electorate wake up in the morning like Sola Braverman, just longing and wishing and dreaming for somebody to get in a plane to Rwanda and be flown off there? Or do you think the electorate really are too busy just trying to pay their bills and keep their heads above water?
Polling is very clear that since the Brexit vote that David referred to back in 2016, people in Britain are far less concerned about immigration, broadly defined. Now, the boat is a slightly different issue. They're far less worried than they were. And it's true, if you ask people unprompted what they're really worried about, the cost of living comes higher, and the economy and the NHS far higher than this issue.
Let me ask David about this. David, do you believe that this illegal migration bill is something dear to the hearts of the voting public, or do you think this is something where Rishi Sunak's gone down a long and impossibly difficult road and he's going to be blocked every step of the way by different European courts? He's never really going to be able to let any single plane take off. It's looking more and more embarrassing with every day that passes, and maybe the general populace aren't very keen on it in the first place.
I would dispute that. I think actually the polling shows that it may not be the top priority, but it's certainly supported. Getting control of immigration, stopping the small boats, is certainly supported by a clear majority of the public, and it's key actually for the Conservatives to win certain areas, certainly in the Midlands and the north of England. We were talking about there. It's a very important issue, and actually some parts of the southeast of England too, where they're under threat from Labour and the Lib Dems. They're going to lose their votes if they can't actually get a handle on this issue. And in the end, this is one of the reasons people voted for Brexit. It was to get back control get back control of the borders. And, you know, the sight of the small boats, thousands coming over it illegally, is really undermining the government's reputation. I would argue, and a lot of Conservative MPs argue, that actually the problem here is that Rishi Sunak's not willing to properly bite the bullet and do what's necessary, and that is to either withdraw or to block the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights, from having jurisdiction on this issue, and that would solve the problem. Then the Rwanda deterrent, because it's only a deterrent, would actually come into play, and the whole issue would be far simpler for him to deal with.
Yvette Cooper, of course, Shadow Home Secretary, she says the entire bill is a con. Let's hear her say it.
This bill is a con that will make problems worse, including increasing the asylum backlog and hotel use, but also making it easier for trafficking gangs and for criminal gangs. The government has lost both its common decency and its common sense, because they're still resisting the measures that could help tackle the criminal gangs, as well as ending up not taking seriously the trafficking warnings from a former Conservative Prime Minister and former Conservative leader of the party.
So is this a situation whereby just before the summer recess, Rishi Sunak could be left with egg all over his face?
I think there's a real risk Friday morning will not look great. I mean, if he were to lose the 3 by-elections, it would be very damaging, and I think it would worry particularly MPs in the Midlands and the North, some in the South East, that their seats were no longer anything like safe. Whether this is enough, I know you haven't quite asked this question, for them then to launch a push against him, to try to get... I doubt it. I think the Conservative Party as a whole feel it had enough leaders in recent months and years, but, you know, David might disagree with that, but I think it would further undermine confidence in him.
All right, last question for David. Is there any question that he might be ousted?
Well, there's certainly some talk about it. There's some discussion. I think a few letters have gone into the 1922 committee, which is, of course, the mechanism for triggering these things. Personally, I think the Conservative MPs would be absolute lunatics to try and depose yet another leader. I think they'd make themselves a laughing stock. They're probably heading for an election defeat next time, but frankly, if they get rid of the 3rd leader in one parliament, they'll struggle to ever get re-elected again, in my view.